Hey there, my name is Kristen Ruiz, and I'm here with my co host, Geneva, Mayne. And today's guest is near and dear to my heart. He is a professional singer, he is a sought after voice teacher. Back when I was directing the PED program at NYU, we kind of ran that program together, and that's where I really got to see his talent and insight and passion for teaching. He was just such a source of excellence. And he was hilarious in between classes. We would always hang out. We worked together in Sonora, teaching voice and doing pedagogy. And so we're really delighted to welcome here today, Jeremy A. I want to be like, yay!
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here.
And in today's episode, we are exploring vocal identity and the tension that a lot of singers feel between a sense of like obligation to create a sound that is expected of them, like a predetermined sound product, and the tension between that and then what they sense is their authentic sound, their authentic way of being. And so a lot of times singers feel like they're at odds between what's expected and what's authentic, and what do you do in that space in between. We're also going to be talking about cognitive distortions, the way we think about things and the way we think about our singing and performance. And for those of us who work with singers, it's really important that we're aware of some of these things and what can be done if there are distortions in how we're understanding or making meaning of a singing experience, and what we can do to help our singers. So that is our conversation for today.
But first, let's check in to see what's new and what's good, our first segment. And I guess I'll start. I am just really happy to be back home again. So that's my what's new and what's good, to be in the studio, to have a decent microphone.
Yes.
I'm really just happy with that. I was able to use this space to record a webinar last night for the Colorado Speech and Language and Hearing Association. We did a 90-minute webinar on trauma-informed voice care. So I'm just glad to be back in my space where I might like to do happy work that I'm proud of.
Where's that webinar going to be played?
This is really good. I should make a link to it in the show notes. It's
Love
going
that.
to be available during the month of November, right on the Colorado Speech, Language, and Hearing website. And for a small fee. I think it's like $25 for non-members and maybe $5 for members. So super accessible for anyone who wants, to hear my thoughts on trauma-informed voice care.
That's awesome.
I'll put a link to it.
Okay, cool.
And
And
up with you, Jeremy.
Well, there's a lot of new pitter patter in our house. My husband and I recently got a puppy, and we currently have an English bulldog, and now our English bulldog has a younger sister, and it's been great. Last night was a massive victory because we made it through, I think, 6 hours without any accidents or waking up. So it's like,
yes.
the first night was like every 3 hours. And so I hand it to parents. I'm like, how do you do it? It's amazing, but she's sweet. She's adorable. And our older bulldog is now like the grumpy older sister, but she's being a really good grumpy older sister. So it's good. Happiness and joy at the house.
Oh, so hopefully we'll get to hear little Gertie at some point.
Yeah, Gertie. Yes, Gertie. She's Gertrude, Gertruda in Czech, or Gerta, or Gertie. So there's a lot of nicknames, and then of course like baked potato and all the other ones. So
that's awesome.
I'm kind of jealous. I want a puppy. You both have pets. I'm jealous.
Oh, I think the more the better. Not necessarily a voice of reason in this. I'll share a little bit here. Super simple. I have been doing a lot of cooking and baking, which is very unlike me. I don't do that. I assemble things. I make things look really pretty that I bought from other places. And it's not until like 20 minutes later that people realize there was nothing really much there, but I fooled them because it looked pretty. I've been actually baking like soup, or making soups and baking bread. We've been doing sourdough bread.
yes.
Yes, and we've got the last little bit of our garden going on. There's still a couple cucumbers coming along and some tomatoes. And so like yesterday we had the salad from the garden, the homemade soup and the homemade bread. And my husband said, he's like, look at us, we're like of the land. and and it feels really good. It feels good to kind of connect to basics and touch on things that just have been neglected here in this household. So that's what's been good and new and surprisingly fun. I've been really enjoying that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I had some of that sourdough bread when I was there. It was fantastic.
Yay. Yay. It's the only bread that I know how to do, but you know. So, Jeremy, it is so good to have you here today. So, can you first just tell us a little bit about the work you do?
Sure. I would consider myself a teaching artist. I have a background in both teaching and also performing. In terms of my background in teaching for the last 18 years, even the tail end of COVID, I was an adjunct university professor voice professor at New York University Steinhardt, where I was teaching vocal performance majors, both classical and musical theater, and also I had headed up the repertoire portion of the pedagogy, advanced certificate in vocal pedagogy there. Taught a few other courses, obviously taught individual lessons. I also sang at the Metropolitan Opera as an extra chorister for 15 years, and that was quite a ride, an exceptional place. And in addition to NYU and also my responsibilities at the Met Chorus, I also have a private voice studio in New York and also in Phoenix, now that I live in Phoenix plus online because of where we are now in life. I also teach at a summer festival called Prague Summer Nights, which is a 1-month festival in the Czech Republic, and it's an amazing place. It's I can't believe that it gets to be my job every summer, and it's a beautiful place. And then of course I also am one of the team members of Sonora, which has been such a rewarding experience, and meeting so many great singers and also getting to work with Kristen, with you.
Amazing, amazing. So, okay, let me ask, based on your work in the performance industry, in academia, in conservatory and festival settings, and in the private studio, what are some of the key challenges that you're seeing singers face that keep them from experiencing their own sense of vocal agency? Like, what's keeping them from experiencing their voice freely in the world? Like, what are you seeing?
I think that one of the things that tends to come up in almost every first lesson I teach with somebody is this idea that they want to be making a sound that they think sounds the way it should sound. They have this idea that it should somehow be either louder, bigger, more dark, more bright, more burnished. Their vibrato should be faster. They should sound older. They should sound more mature. They have these obligations of wanting to make a sound that has been influenced by the industry or people that have been around them that have said, hey, this is more of an operatic sound, or this sounds more musical theater, or I think you sound better when you do this, or when you sound this way. It tends to be a mixture of outside influences, as well as some of their own kind of like predetermined tastes. And of course, one of the tricky things is that as vocalists or voice users, what we hear internally is very different than what the rest of the world hears. So therein lies a little bit of a challenge for sure. And then you throw in outside influences, and people are often married to making a sound versus wanting to experience freedom, both vocal freedom as well as artistic freedom, because those two are highly linked.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that they're trying to be loyal to a predetermined product, and then their voice may or may not match that. What are the things that would keep them from just, okay, why can't they just copy it? Why can't it just copy and paste? They have the thought, just do it.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to quickly say is that, most of us as singers we're naturally influenced by our idols, the people that, that's the reason why we went into singing. I remember some of my favorite singers when I was a young kid and thinking, oh, someday I want to sound like that. And that someday often was like that month or right then and there. And of course, you know, you're a 16-year-old guy. That is an important thing to note, because it's like, I don't want to fault a singer for wanting to do that, because we're led into this world of singing and artistry and expression from some of our greatest models, but we tend to often try to put ourselves into that mold versus kind of finding what we are.
Yeah. Well, I think also it's like singing is not a solo sport. There's a social context. And a lot of times
Absolutely.
it's like, well, can you sound more like, look at how this person does, look it up on YouTube, see how this person does it. Go do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to your question though, you said something like, why can't they just why don't you just do it? Like, why don't you just make that sound that is either what you think it should be or what other people think it should be? And the problem is that, well, the first question I want to ask is, okay, that's fine and dandy, but is it sustainable? That's one thing. Mm-hmm. Can you create that sound on an everyday basis? Can you do it with ease and consistency? Does it feel free? And that's one thing to begin with. Like, does your voice feel like you're more tired after a short period of singing? Do you tend to notice that your certain parts of your range are disconnected from each other? Do you find that it's harder to be expressive or communicative while you're singing? That's a really big giveaway, because generally when we're out of the pocket, when we're not as functionally free, it kind of turns into a moment of technical survival where we're just trying to get the sound to come out, let alone try to say something.
Right.
And so that is one of the things that kind of tends to bubble to the surface, is that if we just make the sound that we think we should be making, we often find that there are ramifications, like there's a cost to it. And that cost certainly is physical in terms of what we can do with our voices. I think that in many ways, our voices are extremely malleable. We have the ability to create a myriad of different colors, qualities of sound. We can sing a ton of different dynamics, but there is a limit. When we go beyond certain limits too long, that's when we pay the cost. And I wish we didn't have to, but it's just a reality of we're all genetically engineered to some extent to make certain sounds that are functionally free. I use that term all the time. My college professor, Barbara Doscher, used to say that. And it sounds so kind of unmusical or unartistic, but it really is an interesting thing, because who wants to go through their life hammering a square peg into a round hole? That's a long life of frustration. And you know, we haven't even, and that's me just touching on the surface of the emotional implications of singers when they feel like they're trying to be something that they're not.
Well, that's actually my next question. Oh, go ahead, Geneva.
I was just going to jump in and say that's a little bit off topic, but run with me for a little bit, because I just read this article in the New York Times, and it had like a photo on the front of Meghan Markle in oversized pants, because I guess they're back in style, as opposed to skinny jeans or skinny or fitted pants, because people gained weight during the pandemic. Okay. And the comments that people were responding to this article was like, who looks good in big oversized pants? Maybe if you're super tall. Like, most people think that what's more forgiving is a more fitted pant with an oversized shirt, as opposed to an oversized bottom with a tight fitted shirt, especially if you've put on weight. So just the idea of like people having to conform to a fashion trend as opposed to what's more authentic or natural, or what works for them. This is kind of what I'm hearing from you. Is that right?
Absolutely, 100%. I love analogies, especially when we're putting it in terms of our physical structure, our physical makeup, and also how our bodies like to work. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really important thing, because we have capabilities, but we are limited by certain things. And I think that this correlation of like clothing and how our bodies work and how they fit and what people think looks best sometimes keeps us from finding our truest selves, and also makes us feel most comfortable in our own skin, right, or our own clothes in this case. Yeah.
Right, which is the more beneficial, which is the juicier exploration, the outer bounds of what we can do versus our version of what somebody else does. And so,
Right,
we talk about it a lot of like, your A game is so much more interesting than your C version of somebody else's A game. And
right,
what do you do with that? And I think when Geneva, when you were just saying that, it reminds me of the element in kind of that I don't think a lot of singers and sometimes even voice teachers and voice workers think about is um, voice type. Can you speak to that, Jeremy, a little bit about when one voice type wants to try to do the maneuvers of another voice type? Because sometimes people don't even realize that there are different categories of voice that are based on physiology and biomakeup.
it's a common thing, certainly within. I know it's certainly within classical singing. I think to some extent with in musical theater and in contemporary voice and other non-classical genres. One of the weird things is that we somehow think that there's one voice type that's somehow better than the other. I'm a lower voice type. I sing baritone and bass baritone rep. And I know, but ironically, the ironic thing is that there was many years in my life where people said, "Oh, that guy, you're probably a baby tenor, or you're a young tenor," and so I'm like, okay. I mean, at the time, I was like, yeah, that's okay. But I know that there is this idea that somehow certain voice types are more preferred than others. And I'm not even talking, if you go in the classical world, we have sopranos, mezzo-sopranos, tenors, and let's say baritones, bass baritones, and stuff, and even smaller divisions within that. But let's even talk about like sopranos. Not all sopranos are created equal in terms of their physical structures and their genetic makeup and the type of sounds that they can create. And often, we live in a world where supersizing is somehow deemed as being better, bigger is better. So if you have a lighter voiced soprano, often there is this either like outwardly spoken or unspoken energy that somehow you would be a little bit better if you were a bigger voice type. And so all of a sudden there is like massive judgments towards the individual that feels like, wow, I am actually less than because I am 6 foot tall versus 6'1". I'm going to use that analogy. There turns into a little bit of that behavior. And the amount of frustration that kicks in for singers when they feel like, even within voice types, I need to somehow be a bigger voice type, or actually I'm not a mezzo soprano, I should be a soprano, or vice versa. I mean, that happens too. Or I'm a baritone and I'm singing in contemporary musical theater, and I just need to sing those higher notes because that's what I need to do in this industry, because it's better if I'm a tenor. Which is really kind of weird to think like it's better if I was just a different person. Because that's what it sounds like.
There's an ethics problem in there, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's an ethics issue.
The amount of frustration and I will say this, like it turns into this feeling of incompetence, like you're incomplete, you're not enough. That's a very common term that we use these days. You're not enough. And you feel there's a certain degree of shame that kicks in because you're trying your darndest to make other people happy because they're saying, hey, if you're more like this, then you're better. And then they've even bought into themselves that if I sound more like my famous idol, then I'll be better. And that is a really, really heartbreaking thing, because I know some singers will spend a lifetime doing that. They will pound the square peg into the round hole. And I think, singers, we are a unique type of people where we're very self-aware of our voices. And I can comfortably say as a singer, like, so much of my identity as a person is linked to my voice. If you tell me that you like my voice, you're basically saying you like me. Mm-hmm. And I think for most singers, we really gravitate to that. I know that other instrumentalists might say that the same thing, but there's something very unique because it's my body and it's also my soul. as when I'm expressing. For you to say, I don't like the color of your voice, it's like saying you don't like the fact that I have black hair. I just, it's interesting because it takes the singer down an emotional place in which they feel like they are not enough. They're incomplete.
And I think that depending on the kind of circles that the singer is in, this type of experience can border on even being abusive. Because it is shaming and humiliating, and they might be asking, why me, and things like that. I wish I could. And this kind of self-talk that is abusive. It reminds me of when Serena Williams came on stage as a tennis star and people shamed her body for years. And think about how wonderfully athletic and powerful Serena Williams' body is. And if she believed the things that were said to her, the world would have been robbed of witnessing a GOAT, like a GOAT, greatest of all time player. And I wonder how many singers have been in such a place where they've been put down or made to feel inadequate because their voice didn't look like, I don't know, a Whitney Houston or a Mariah Carey or whatever it was. And they're like, this is not for me. And just didn't have the resilient reserves to keep honing their skills for their instrument, as opposed to trying to bend to someone else's idea of how they should perform. I think it's abusive.
Geneva, I think that this, in my experience, so I'm speaking anecdotally, in my experience, more singers have this story than not, at least in the ones that I meet. And I can speak from like firsthand experience. I was in a program at one point where if you were soprano, the privilege went to the coloratura. I didn't know that at the time that full lyric was a thing until later. And so my voice didn't do what, I mean, I could do it because it could move, but it never felt home until I found a new set of literature. And so I ended up leaving that feeling very defeated. And I didn't have the language or the maturity to say, hey, there's a systemic issue here. It just was immediately, I'm not enough. It's not good enough. And then I went to it. I said, well, let me leave the classical world. Let me go do something. And I loved blues informed pop fusions. And I got into it. Well, and I had the feel for it, but I was a very bright, like the tone color is very bright. And so I realized, oh, it doesn't have that warmth. Let me manufacture that. That also didn't feel so great. And I started to realize, oh my gosh, my voice sounds like Mary Poppins who wants to get down. What am I doing?
I want to see that.
And it took a long time to get to the point where, you know what? Mary Poppins has a right to get down too.
But only once in a while.
Yeah. But I think what it comes down to is what is the truth of the material. The material is the song, and it is the voice itself. What is the truth? So are we pursuing an obligation? Or are we pursuing truth and freedom? So Jeremy, can you speak based on what you're seeing? What are the emotional repercussions that these singers are reporting to you, that they're experiencing?
Well, the first thing that is interesting is that their confidence is just shaken completely, for sure. And because their voice identity has been shaken, and therefore their identity is shaken. And to me, as singers, they're so woven together. I think one of the interesting things is that the initial feeling that comes is, I must not be doing it right. Mm-hmm. I must be doing something wrong. It must be me that's not getting it.
Yeah.
And so when they're not able to achieve something, or they're not able to sustain something, they really believe that I just need to work harder, or I need to work with a different teacher, I need to work with a different coach, or I need to kind of rebrand, or whatever it is. There's a feeling that I must be doing something wrong, because as I try to fit into this obligation, I'm not able to sustain it, and it's also not rewarded. And I think that is the biggest byproduct of all of it. And I think a lot of times, sometimes the frustration becomes so great that the joy of singing is kind of shot down out of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm using obviously a bird reference, and like it kind of kills that inner that instinct that makes us, that was even a reason why we were brought to music to begin with, which is I want to sing, I want to be expressive, I want to share, I want to communicate, and I want to use this as my vehicle. It sometimes becomes so painful, not just physically sometimes, but emotionally and psychologically, that they just want to throw in the towel because they have spent too much time trying to fulfill an obligation versus find their own voice. And I think that my college professor, Barbara Doshrig, and she was quoted in a book saying that I am accused of thinking that all voices are beautiful. Well, if they're operating the way they should, they are. And I remember when I read that for the first time, even now when I say it out loud, it's like an emotional awareness of like, there's no predetermined versions of beauty and desirability. And like when we talk about like physical aspects of somebody, it's like the idea that a man or a woman should be a certain height and that they should have a waistline like this and their eyes should be this color of their hair. I mean, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. We would never use that, or we shouldn't be using that, in my opinion. But in some ways in voice, we tend to do it. And I do find that it kind of kills the soul of the singer versus like what the true goal should be. I mean, that Barbara Doshrig quote was basically saying your task should be find freedom in your instrument. Find a way in which your voice is the most flexible, the easiest to produce, the most reliable, the most consistent. And it always tends to, the proof is in the pudding when you notice that the singer is the most expressive in terms of their capabilities. And then whatever is associated, that sound that's associated with that operation, great. Yeah. It basically makes, I do believe it. We all have beautiful voices. We really do. And some of us have voices that are in transition. But hopefully that transition is to find a true and authentic and reliable and sustainable way of singing.
Mm. Well, I was a cellist first before I sang. And when I played cello, I never played it and wished it sounded like a clarinet. You know?
Yeah.
And I was also thinking like, the cello that I have, it was a rent to own. So I paid towards it until it was mine. And I wonder for those of us who are voice teachers and voice workers, one thing to think is like part of it is teaching functional freedom of the voice. How do we help them use their voice in a free, sustainable, vibrant way that feels true so that they're saying what they want to say in a way that feels repeatable and awesome. But maybe with a side teaching element of teach to own, teach them to own their instrument. And I can imagine for the singer who's struggling with this, who is trying to live to the obligation and their perceived expectation, I can imagine there's a lot to unpack because there probably are things that when they're singing doesn't feel right. And some of it might be just we have to shift the coordination. We have to build the technique that will make this freedom possible. And then it gets layered in with then these expectations and trying to unpack these interwoven layers. It's no small feat for that singer. Yeah.
It's not, because I think that it's years of ingrained behavior, which then is years of ingrained mindset and self-awareness. And I mean, if someone were to come to me and say, by the way, you're a tenor, there would be this visceral response of like, what the hell are you, like, you don't know me? Like it's like some type of like, it almost is equal to this feeling like your parents are not the parents you think they are, like, or like you have a different father or something, like something along those lines, something that would have a visceral, almost a defensive response of like, how dare you tell me what I am not or what I am. And I think these types of the scenario that you're describing, it is so ingrained in people that sometimes even when you bring them to this new place of freedom and a new level of coordination where they have more capabilities of being expressive and their voice is more even and lined up. Sometimes, this is the most fascinating part, is that they have associated singing with being difficult and heavy and hard, that when that is removed, it's both a mental game that they have to adapt to, but also on a physical level, sometimes the response literally is, that can't be it, it's too easy. Because they have literally ironed in the coordination of, by the way, when I make sound, it's always hard. And so the moment they don't have that feeling, it's actually disarming that something could feel this free, or they could feel that fun, or they could feel, and also like it's a very emotional response for a lot of singers when they actually feel the truest sense of freedom, because Kristen, I've used this expression before. When they're singing now, since their system is so free, they actually feel like they're no longer expressively constipated. And because we all have something to say, but like sometimes the machine or the vehicle that makes it happen is not agreeing with us, or we're being led astray to do it a certain way, or we're making choices that keep us from that. But the moment it's free, you feel like your truest self, your authentic self, the real McCoy is now somehow out there and everyone's hearing it. That is an empowering moment where someone says, I feel like I'm finally heard. That's me.
Sure. Exactly. Well, and I think one of the ways I kind of conceptualize voice for myself is the idea of a machine within a machine. We have the physical instrument that requires coordination, but there's also the human being housing that,
Yeah.
and that whole, the things we think, the things we feel, our reaction to physical and social environments is in relationship to that. So it's a machine within a machine where there's a dynamic relationship between the two, and we are meaning making machines. And every experience that we have, our job is to, just as human beings, is to make sense of that. And if we make sense of it in a way that is disempowering, we have to relook at that and say, how are we making meaning of this in a way that is empowering? And this is where the research starts to be super interesting. Geneva, can you share a little bit about some of the stuff that you've been finding?
Well, yeah. So we can start heading into our agentic practices segment, because what I'm hearing from this conversation is that singers often deal with cognitive distortions around what they should sound like, as opposed to thinking about what their authentic sound is and how to best present that. So a great strategy to use for this is a strategy called cognitive reappraisal, sometimes called cognitive reframing. And it is a key component of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And it's happening when we notice our negative thoughts and we replace them with positive ones. So people who are experiencing stressful or difficult experiences or traumatic experiences, because we always have trauma in the back of our mind when we're on this podcast, you can encourage your own resilience by reframing your own thoughts. So think about performers who are performing at the highest level. They need to build those reserves of resilience, and learning how to practice cognitive reframing or appraisal is a great strategy to use. So the peer-reviewed research evidence suggests that cognitive reframing prevents burnout, reduces anxiety, enhances communication, improves function, and elevates overall quality of life. So for singers who want to encourage their own well-being and vibrate higher, reframing cognitive distortions such as should statements or catastrophizing with positive thoughts is an agentic practice.
Can I ask you really quick? You said cognitive distortions. Can you explain what a cognitive distortion is and what the should statement, how that fits in?
Sure. So a cognitive distortion, I sometimes think we forget how powerful thoughts are. So our thoughts repeated, they shape our words and our actions. And our words and actions repeated shape our habits. And if we want to have a habit of excellence, it's good to look at our thoughts. So a cognitive distortion is anything that might prevent you or be unhelpful to you in terms of living out what you want to live. Okay. So a should distortion or a should statement would be a thought pattern where you're saying, oh, it should be like this, or I should be doing better, or I should sound like this. And you're just expressing this frustration around what you are not and what you think you should be.
Jeremy, do you hear should statements in your work with singers? Colleagues or peers
the
or
time.
students?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, both with what their voice should sound like, how far they should be along in their career.
That one a lot, yeah.
And what they should have figured out by this point in their lives as a singer and as an actor.
What they shouldn't be dealing with anymore.
Yes, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think it's all of those things. Yeah. Okay,
so Geneva, that singer who's stuck with the inner dialogue that keeps looping on, I should be, I should sound like, I shouldn't struggle with this, I should be further along, all of that. What do they do?
All right, so a very practical thing to do, especially if you're someone who's working with a singer, is to help them recognize this pattern of thinking. Because unless for yourself, a practice of mindful awareness where you're looking at your thoughts and your feelings often, either through journaling or some other kind of mindful practice, you're not always going to see it for yourself. But if you work with singers and you're hearing the should statements come up, it's something that you can say, hey, did you notice that you just did a should statement? You said, I should such and such and such and such. Mm-hmm. And have the person, the singer, notice this should statement expressing itself in their words or in their actions, and then have them notice, how does it make you feel? Is that a helpful thought? Is that thought true? Did that thought come from you, or did it come from someone else who's influential, like a teacher or a parental figure? And then have them consider replacing it with a thought that is more helpful. So instead of, I should be a multi-million-dollar, singer at this stage of my life, it can be, I'm grateful for all of the things I have achieved up until now, and what I continue to work with, I'll continue to see bear fruit. Something like that.
I've seen something similar where instead of like shifting it from, I should sound like, or I should be further along, I'd like to, and what is the thing you'd like to experience? Right. And then notice in your body, when you say, I should be further along, I shouldn't be struggling with this, notice what happens. There's a contraction in your body. And then when you say, you know what, I'd like to experience X, Y, and Z, this thing around the corner that I want to aim towards. I'd like to experience this. Notice the expansion that happens in the body. And then asking them which one is going to get you to the thing you want faster.
Yeah.
I've even heard, like, to the extent where that it can be re-narrated also in a way of saying, instead of like, I should be further along, it's, I am currently taking action that is getting me closer to where I want to be.
Right.
Like it's a present tense moment in which what you're doing is participating in, or you're experiencing what you just said, the place of where you would like to be, what you'd like to become or get to.
Some of the work I've read, it talks about the power of the subconscious, and that the subconscious doesn't determine or doesn't delineate between the positive statements and desires and the fear-based negative ones. And whatever is in the subconscious wants to realize itself in the physical world. And so that's why capturing our thoughts is so important, and not letting them run amok, because whatever that inner dialogue is, that is what wants to come out in the world.
That's what we manifest. Yes.
I think that one of the unique things in the singer world is the comparison, competitive aspect of it. I mean, the reality is there's one role and there could be multiple people up for that role. And so the reality is there's this competitive or comparison. Well, a famous quote is saying is, compare and despair. The moment you start comparing, there's this kind of self-assessment that you're somehow less than or not equal to or greater. And I think that with singers, what is helpful, and it really takes like mindful awareness, it takes a mental discipline to say, I'm not going to focus on that aspect that I am not where that person is, or I'm not somehow better than that person. I will simply acknowledge the progress that I have made. I will turn around and say, I used to be over there a month ago, a year ago, and I'm now over here. That is what I have done. And I will keep my energy on that. It's tricky because I think that it's so easy to slide back into the other one. And I realize some people that could be listening to this conversation, but it's like, no, you need the competitiveness to like push you forward. And I say, well, there could be some benefits to it, for sure. But in terms of how the individual travels through this world, is a very different experience. And I don't know if it's better to say, well, I was competitive and I never felt like it was good enough and I pushed myself. And so I had these few moments of glory, but the rest of it was just defeating and hurtful, and I felt like crap afterwards, versus I spent a lifetime of believing in myself and recognizing the things, the changes that I've made, and my mindset is just a better perspective of who I am in this world as a singer and an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I brought her up earlier, but this is one of the things that I've heard Serena Williams say, is that she's not competing against other people. She's competing against herself. She's competing against her best effort. She's competing against, her next big achievement, because it's not about the competition with others. It's about being her best self. Yeah. And I love that.
Love that.
That's a more authentic way of being in the universe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and that idea of like reflecting back to propel forward, I mean, that's one of the ways that we can then compete against ourselves, so that in the sense that, I don't think the comfort zone is a good place for us to live. That's not where growth happens. That's not where it's exciting, right? So we do have to keep something. We're designed to grow. We're designed to thrive. We're designed to peek around the next bend. But that reflecting back to propel forward is a way to do that in a healthier way than I got to beat out the next person. I need to pull somebody back so I can get forward, or I need to feel bad about myself if I'm not willing to do that. And I think the other thing for those of us who work with singers is we have to acknowledge that this is a serious hurdle in the singer's story. And if our awareness can grow into keeping these things on the radar, we could possibly shave the learning curve and the time off it takes for a singer to start to grow into these things. That we could actually have the power to positively influence the singers, so that it's not that they don't have to do that identity development, that they have to deal with these hurdles and these challenges, but could we take some of the edge off? Could we speed up the time that it takes, like a good Sherpa, to lead them through? So I think this is really powerful stuff.
One thing I think that's interesting in terms of dealing with in the studio, when singers say, well, now when I sing that, I sound like a baritone. That's a bad thing. And I think one of the things that is tricky to manage in that setting is, how do you deal with that? And I think one of the things to certainly say is to a singer that, first of all, like, what does your body tell you? Is your body giving you a thumbs up? Sometimes it's new coordination, so there can be certainly some instability. That's a given. But generally, when there's any glimmer of release, freedom, flexibility, literally feels easier, or even more, just feels amazing, feels physically good to make sound. I mean, run to the light. I mean, come on, like your body is going to be smarter than any of my ears and your ears and every other voice teacher combined. Your body's telling you something. Don't turn away from it. Like stop and kind of smell that rose to see what's going on. I think one of the hardest conversations to have is that, but I want to sound like so-and-so. And I always think of like, if you played 2 notes of, these are all, let's see, Cynthia Erivo, Jennifer Hudson, Kathleen Battle, Nina Simone, Ella Fitzgerald, Leontine Price, I would know all of their voices within 2 notes. And the interesting thing is that, like Kristen, you said this earlier, I forgot the way you phrased it, but why not put all of your energy into sounding just like you? Because all of those singers, as much as they're famous, famous women within the singing world, maybe they did go out to, like, they might have been brought to music because they wanted to do what their favorite idols did. But at the end of the day, the thing that made all those women that I just mentioned incredibly unique and famous was the fact that they focused on just making themselves, not making an imitation of a predecessor within the industry. And I think that's really important to tell singers, because that's the thing that made those people special. It wasn't because they sounded like someone else.
Isn't that art? The pursuit of truth, the truth of that instrument, the truth of what that person wants to say through the material of the song, through that instrument. I mean, that's the art right there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. This was a really great episode. In this episode, we talked about how we can use cognitive reappraisal as an agentic practice to help singers experience well-being and authenticity. We are so grateful to our guest, Jeremy A., for sharing how he does this work in the Singer Studio. Thank you so much for coming, Jeremy.
It's been my pleasure. It's been great.